She's trembling, trying not to cry. The gate agent has no clue she just humiliated a Purple Heart recipient. But the Navy SEAL pilot walking up behind them, he knows. And what happens in the next 47 seconds doesn't just shock everyone, it triggers a chain reaction that reaches the Pentagon. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Sarah Martinez pulled her worn military duffel bag closer to her chest. The fabric was faded olive green, bearing the scars of 3 tours in Afghanistan burn marks from an IED blast, a small tear from shrapnel, and faded bloodstains that no amount of washing could completely erase. Her fingers traced the edge of her Purple Heart medal through the bag's front pocket, a habit she developed during sleepless nights when the nightmares came calling. Gate A23 was bustling with the usual chaos of delayed flights and frustrated travelers, but Sarah felt invisible among the crowd. At 32, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world while carrying invisible wounds. Her left leg, still healing from surgery to remove metal fragments, ached with each step. The doctor said she was lucky to be walking at all. Lucky. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. Final boarding call for United Flight 447 to San Diego. The gate agent announced, her voice cutting through Sarah's thoughts like a knife through silk. San Diego. Home. Or what used to be home before 3 tours had changed everything, including her. Sarah approached the counter, fishing her boarding pass from her jacket pocket with trembling fingers. The paper was slightly damp from her nervous perspiration. After 18 months in military hospitals, this was her first flight home, the first time she'd see her 8-year-old daughter Emma, since the incident that had nearly killed her and ended her military career in one devastating moment. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's been a mistake," the gate agent said, barely glancing up from her computer screen. Her nameplate read Jennifer, and her voice carried mechanical indifference of someone who had delivered bad news 1,000 times before. Sarah's heart lurched. "I'm sorry, what kind of mistake?" Jennifer's manicured fingers clicked across the keyboard with irritating efficiency. "Your seat assignment has been changed. You were originally in 3A first class, but that was an error in our system. You've been moved to 27B middle seat." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had saved for 6 months, scraping together every penny from her disability payments to afford the first-class ticket, not for luxury, but for space. Space to stretch her damaged leg. Space to have room for the panic attacks that sometimes struck without warning. Space to hide if the memories became too much during the flight. "I paid for first class," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "I have the receipt." Jennifer finally looked up, her eyes scanning Sarah with the kind of casual dismissal reserved for inconvenient customers. "The receipt shows coach pricing, ma'am. The upgrade was complimentary, but we had to accommodate a Gold Premier member who needed the seat." "I am a Gold Premier member," Sarah replied, pulling out her phone to show her airline status. "I've flown with United for 12 years. Military deployment flights, medical transports." "I understand your frustration," Jennifer interrupted, though her tone suggested she understood nothing at all. "But the other passenger is priority. If you don't take your assigned seat, I'll have to give your spot to someone on the standby list." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the warning sign that preceded the dark spiral. Around her, other passengers were staring, some with curiosity, others with the impatience of people who just wanted to get home. A businessman in an expensive suit tapped his foot, checking his Rolex. A young mother bounced a crying baby while juggling a diaper bag and sippy cup. Nobody saw the war veteran fighting a battle they couldn't understand. "Please," Sarah whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I need that seat. For medical reasons. I have documentation." "Ma'am, if you have medical documentation, you should have submitted it when you booked the flight," Jennifer said, her attention already shifting to the next passenger in line. I can't make exceptions without proper paperwork filed in advance. Sarah's hand shook as she opened her bag, searching for the medical forms she kept with her everywhere. But before she could find them, Jennifer had already called out, "Next." The businessman pushed past Sarah, muttering something about difficult customers under his breath. The dismissal was complete, final, humiliating. But what Jennifer and the crowd of impatient travelers didn't notice was a figure emerging from the jetway, a tall man in a crisp United Pilot's uniform, his gold wings gleaming under the harsh terminal lighting. Captain Marcus Hawk Rodriguez had been making his routine Peoria flight walkthrough when he heard a commotion at the gate. At 45, Hawk carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had commanded respect in both military and civilian life. His dark eyes, sharp and assessing, swept the scene with a tactical awareness that never fully left former Navy SEALs. 20 years of military service had trained him to notice what others missed, and what he saw now made his blood run cold. The way the woman stood, ramrod straight despite obvious pain. The unconscious way she positioned herself to watch all exits. The careful control in her voice that spoke of someone accustomed to maintaining composure under extreme pressure. But most telling of all was what he glimpsed when she opened her bag, the familiar purple ribbon of a medal that every military service member recognized. A Purple Heart. This wasn't just any frustrated passenger. This was a wounded warrior being denied basic dignity, and something deep in Hawk's chest, the part of him that had sworn an oath to leave no one behind, ignited like a fuse. What do you think Captain Rodriguez should do in this situation? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because others didn't understand their story? Drop a comment below and let me know how you would handle this if you were in his shoes. The question hanging in the air was simple but loaded with consequence. What happens when an unstoppable force of honor meets an immovable wall of indifference? Sarah Martinez was about to discover that some codes of conduct run deeper than corporate policy, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the shadows when you need them most. As Sarah stood frozen at the gate, clutching her boarding pass with white knuckles, memories crashed over her like enemy fire. She could still hear Emma's voice from their last video call 18 months ago. "Mommy, when are you coming home? I drew you a picture for your room, but Grandma says you're sleeping in the hospital now." 8-year-old Emma didn't understand why Mommy had been gone for so long, why the cheerful woman who used to read bedtime stories and build blanket forts had been replaced by someone who spoke in careful, measured tones during their brief video calls. Sarah's mother, Patricia, tried to shield Emma from the worst of it, but children see everything. They feel the weight of unspoken truths in the spaces between words. The last clear memory Sarah had before the IED blast was writing a letter to Emma, promising to be home for her 9th birthday in 2 weeks. That was 547 days ago. She had counted every single one during the endless cycle of surgeries, physical therapy, and psychological evaluations that had become her world. The doctors called her recovery miraculous. The therapists praised her remarkable progress. But they didn't understand that surviving the blast had been the easy part. The real battle was learning how to live with the guilt of being the only one in her unit to make it home alive. 7 good soldiers had died that day, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she should have been number 8. Staff Sergeant Michael Chun had been sitting next to her when the world exploded. He was 24 years old, newly engaged to his college sweetheart, and had shown Sarah pictures of the ring he bought just hours before the blast. His last words were about wedding cake flavors. Specialist Jennifer Barnes had been driving, singing OFF key to a country song on the radio. She was from a small town in Oklahoma and sent half her paycheck home to help her younger siblings pay for college. She died protecting people she'd never met, in a country thousands of miles from the wheat fields she called home. Each night, Sarah carried their ghosts with her into troubled sleep, wondering why she deserved to see another sunrise when they didn't. Survivor's guilt, the therapist called it, as if naming it somehow made it manageable. But guilt didn't follow clinical protocols. It lived in her chest like shrapnel, cutting deeper with each breath. Meanwhile, Captain Marcus Hawk Rodriguez watched the scene at the gate with a calculated assessment of someone trained to read danger in a room full of civilians. But this wasn't combat, this was something far more insidious. This was a system failing someone who had already sacrificed everything for others. Hawk's own demons were different, but no less real. At 45, he had spent half his life in the military, rising to the ranks of the Navy SEALs through a combination of natural leadership and an unwillingness to quit that bordered on the pathological. His call sign, Hawk, hadn't come from his sharp eyes or tactical awareness. It came from his habit of circling back for wounded teammates, no matter how dangerous the situation became. Leave no one behind wasn't just military doctrine for Hawk. It was a spiritual covenant that had defined every major decision of his adult life. It was why he'd volunteer for the most dangerous missions, why he'd turn down safer assignments to stay with his team, and ultimately, why he'd left the military when the bureaucracy began to feel more dangerous than the battlefield. The transition to civilian life had been brutal. Most former SEALs struggled with the shift from a world where honor, loyalty, and sacrifice meant everything to a corporate environment where profit margins and quarterly reports took precedence. Hawk had been lucky to find a place with United Airlines, where his military experience translated into the kind of calm leadership passengers needed during emergencies. But flying commercial aircraft wasn't the same as leading men into combat. The stakes felt smaller, the purpose less clear. On his worst days, Hawk wondered if he was slowly dying from a lack of meaning, like a plant starving for sunlight. That all changed the day he met Isabella. Isabella Vasquez had been a flight attendant on Hawk's first international route to Mexico City. She was intelligent, compassionate, and possessed a rare quality that seemed to see straight through Hawk's carefully constructed emotional armor. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than fleeting attraction. But Isabella had been killed in a car accident 8 months ago, struck by a drunk driver while volunteering at a children's hospital. The irony was devastating: a woman who had dedicated her life to helping others, taken by someone too selfish to call a cab. Hawk had been planning to propose the following month. The engagement ring was still in his dresser drawer, a daily reminder of futures that would never come to pass. Since Isabella's death, Hawk had thrown himself into work with the kind of desperate intensity that his former teammates would have recognized. He took extra flights, covered for sick colleagues, and volunteered for the most challenging routes. Anything to avoid the empty silence of his apartment and the weight of grief that threatened to crush him during quiet moments. But watching Sarah Martinez being dismissed and humiliated at the gate awakened something in Hawk that he thought died with Isabella's sense of righteous purpose that demanded action. As he approached the counter, Hawk noticed details that others had missed. The way Sarah favored her left leg, suggesting significant injury. The careful way she controlled her breathing, indicating someone managing pain or anxiety. The military bearing that never fully disappeared, even in civilian clothes. And most importantly, the quiet dignity with which she endured treatment that would have sent most people into righteous fury. This woman was a warrior, and she was being treated like an inconvenience. Behind the gate counter, Jennifer continued processing passengers with mechanical efficiency, oblivious to the storm she had unleashed. In her world of flight schedules and customer service protocols, she saw Sarah as just another difficult customer trying to game the system for a free upgrade. Jennifer's own story was one of corporate survival in an industry that chewed up employees and spit them out. She'd been working for United for 6 years, watching promises of advancement dissolve into longer hours and more demanding passengers. Her engagement to her high school boyfriend had ended when he got tired competing with her work schedule. Her dreams of traveling the world had been reduced to brief glimpses through terminal windows. The job had made Jennifer cynical, teaching her that people would say anything to get what they wanted. Fake medical conditions, fabricated emergencies, manufactured outrage, she'd seen it all. So when Sarah Martinez claimed to need first class for medical reasons, Jennifer's default assumption was skepticism rather than compassion. But Jennifer didn't know that her decision in this moment would ripple far beyond a simple seat assignment. She didn't know that the woman she was dismissing had earned her medals in blood and sand, or that the pilot approaching the counter had built his entire identity around protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Most crucially, She didn't know that some battles aren't fought with weapons or policies, but with the quiet power of human decency in the face of institutional indifference. The three of them, Sarah, Hawk, and Jennifer, were about to discover that honor isn't just a military concept. It's a choice that defines who we are in moments when no one is watching and nothing is required except our own moral compass. As Hawk stepped forward, his pilot's wings catching the fluorescent light, Sarah looked up and their eyes met for the first time. In that instant, something passed between them, a recognition that transcended words. Two warriors, scarred by different battles, but united by the same unbreakable code of service. The real story was just beginning. Captain Marcus Rodriguez's approach to the gate counter was measured, deliberate, the same controlled advance he'd once used when approaching hostile territory. His pilot's uniform commanded instant respect. The 4 gold stripes on his sleeves, carrying the weight of 20,000 flight hours and 2 decades of military service. Conversations around the gate quieted as passengers instinctively recognized authority in motion. "Excuse me," Hawk said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "I'm Captain Rodriguez, pilot for Flight 447. I couldn't help but notice there seems to be an issue with this passenger seating assignment." Jennifer looked up, her expression shifting from bored indifference to nervous attention. Pilots didn't typically get involved in gate disputes unless something was seriously wrong. "Oh, Captain Rodriguez, it's just a minor seating issue. We had to make some adjustments for a premier member." Hawk's dark eyes moved to Sarah, taking in details that painted a picture clearer than any briefing. The way she held herself spine straight despite obvious discomfort, chin raised in defiance of circumstances trying to break her down, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of either pain medication or the aftermath of trauma, the protective way she clutched her military duffel, as if it contained everything precious she had left in the world. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Sarah directly, "I'm Captain Rodriguez. May I ask about your military service?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. In civilian airports, among crowds of people absorbed in their phones and personal dramas, military service often went unnoticed, unacknowledged. The fact that this pilot, this stranger, had recognized something in her bearing that others missed felt like stepping into sunlight after months in darkness. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, Army Combat Medic," she replied, her voice steadying as she fell into familiar military protocol. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 101st Airborne Division. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that this wasn't just another entitled passenger trying to scam an upgrade. The businessman who had pushed past Sarah stopped scrolling on his phone, his attention caught by the exchange. Hawk nodded slowly, and Sarah caught something in his expression, a flash of recognition that went deeper than professional courtesy. "Combat medic," he repeated. "That means you were out there saving lives while people were actively trying to kill you. That takes a special kind of courage." "I was just doing my job," Sarah replied automatically, the response trained into her by years of deflecting praise she felt she didn't deserve. "No," Hawk said firmly. "You were doing much more than your job. And from the looks of that Purple Heart ribbon I can see in your bag, you paid a price for it." Sarah's breath caught. The Purple Heart was partially visible through an open pocket. She hadn't realized how obvious it was to someone who knew what to look for. Around them, other passengers were beginning to pay attention, phones lowering as the charged atmosphere demanded their focus. Jennifer cleared her throat, sensing the conversation was spiraling beyond her control. "Captain, I understand military service is admirable, but we have policies about seat assignments that I have to follow. What's the name of the premier member who bumped her?" Hawk interrupted, his tone still polite, but with an edge that made Jennifer take an involuntary step back. I can't give out passenger information." "Jennifer," Hawk said, reading her nameplate with deliberate emphasis, "let me explain something to you. This woman served 3 tours in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. She saved lives under enemy fire. She earned that Purple Heart through blood and sacrifice. And right now, you're telling me that someone's frequent flyer status is more important than ensuring a wounded veteran can travel with dignity." The gate area had gone completely silent. Even the crying baby had quieted, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, part embarrassment at being the center of attention, part gratitude that someone was finally fighting for her. But it was what Hawk did next that changed everything. Without breaking eye contact with Jennifer, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a credit card. How much is the difference between coach and first class of this flight? Captain, you don't have to, Sarah began. $847. Jennifer said automatically, then immediately looked like she regretted speaking. Hawk handed over his card without hesitation. Upgrade Staff Sergeant Martinez to first class. Put it on my personal card. Sir, Jennifer stammered, that's very generous, but our policy states that once a seat has been reassigned for a Premier member, then move the Premier member, Hawk said, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that his former SEAL teammates would have recognized as a final warning. Find them another first-class seat. Upgrade them to the next flight. Give them vouchers. I don't care what it costs the airline. But that woman is getting the seat she paid for. Jennifer's face went pale. I don't have the authority to. Then get someone who does. Hawk's pilot wings caught the light as he leaned slightly forward. Because I'm not walking onto that aircraft until this is resolved properly. And if I'm not walking onto that aircraft, then Flight 447 isn't going anywhere, which means all these passengers are going to be very unhappy, and I'll be sure to explain exactly why their flight was delayed. The threat was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. A delayed flight meant misconnections, angry passengers, corporate scrutiny, and potential job consequences for everyone involved. Jennifer's hand shook as she reached for her phone to call a supervisor, but as she dialed, Sarah grabbed Hawk's arm gently, her touch hesitant but firm. Captain Rodriguez, she said softly, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why are you doing this? Hawk looked down at her hand on his arm, and for a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked. Sarah saw something raw and painful flash across his features, grief, loss, and a desperate need to do something that mattered. Because 18 months ago, I wasn't there when someone I loved needed help. He said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. And I've been looking for a chance to balance those scales ever since. Their eyes met again, and this time, Sarah saw past the uniform and the authority to the wounded soul beneath. Two people, shaped by different traumas, but united by the same fundamental truth. Sometimes the only way to heal your own broken pieces is to help put someone else back together. In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection forged not in attraction or romance, but in the deeper recognition of shared purpose and mutual understanding. Neither of them knew that this single act of defiance would set in motion events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, honor, and the price of doing what's right. Jennifer finished her phone call and looked up with an expression of barely concealed panic. My supervisor's on the way, she announced to the now captivated audience of gate passengers. Hawk smiled for the first time since approaching the counter, and it transformed his entire face. Outstanding, he said. This should be interesting. Sarah Martinez was about to discover that some battles are worth fighting not because you're guaranteed to win, but because the fight itself defines who you choose to be when everything else is stripped away. The tension at Gate A23 was thick enough to cut with a knife as passengers began gathering in a loose semicircle around the unfolding drama. Sarah Martinez felt exposed under their scrutiny, but something about Captain Rodriguez's unwavering presence beside her made the attention bearable. For the first time in 18 months, she wasn't facing a battle alone. Jennifer's supervisor arrived within minutes, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s named Patricia Kellerman, whose corporate smile couldn't quite mask the irritation in her eyes. She carried herself with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to putting out fires and managing difficult situations with minimal fuss. Captain Rodriguez, Patricia said with forced warmth, extending her hand. I'm Patricia Kellerman, station manager. I understand there's been some confusion about seat assignments. Hawk shook her hand but didn't return the smile. No confusion at all, Miss Kellerman. Staff Sergeant Martinez here paid for a first-class ticket to accommodate medical needs related to her military service. Your employee bumped her to coach to make room for someone with higher frequent flyer status. I'm requesting you correct this error immediately. Patricia's smile tightened. Sarah recognized the look. It was the same expression military bureaucrats wore when they were about to deny a reasonable request with unreasonable justification. I appreciate your concern for our passengers, Captain, Patricia said smoothly, but I reviewed the situation and unfortunately, the original assignment was made in error. Our Premier Gold member had a confirmed first-class reservation that predated Ms. Martinez's booking by several hours. Show me the timestamps, Hawk said immediately. Patricia blinked, clearly not expecting to be challenged on technical details. I'm sorry. The booking timestamps. If this Premier member truly had a confirmed reservation that predated Staff Sergeant Martinez's booking, then show me the computer records. Should be simple enough to verify. Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. In her experience, corporate representatives relied on people accepting their explanations without demanding proof. But Hawk was treating this like a military briefing where every claim had to be substantiated with evidence. Patricia's composure cracked slightly. Captain, I don't think it's appropriate to. Actually, Hawk interrupted, pulling out his phone. Let me make this simpler. He dialed a number and put the call on speaker. This is Captain Rodriguez. I need to speak with Regional Operations about Flight 447. Good afternoon, Captain Rodriguez, came a crisp voice through the speaker. This is Operations Manager Williams. How can I help you? Tom, I have a situation at Gate A23 involving a Purple Heart recipient who's being denied appropriate seating accommodations. I need someone from Corporate Relations down here immediately to review our passenger service protocols for disabled veterans. Patricia's face went ashen. Corporate Relations meant executive attention, media exposure risk, and potential policy reviews that could cascade into weeks of meetings and scrutiny. Captain, she said quickly, I'm sure we can resolve this without involving corporate. But Tom Williams was already responding through the phone. Absolutely, Captain. We take our commitment to veterans very seriously. I'm sending someone down right now. Can you give me details on the nature of the accommodation issue? Before Patricia could intervene, Sarah found herself speaking directly to the phone. This is Staff Sergeant Martinez. I purchased a first-class ticket because I have medical documentation requiring extra legroom due to combat injuries. I was bumped to accommodate a frequent flyer, despite my medical needs and confirmed reservation. Staff Sergeant, thank you for your service. Williams replied immediately. I want to personally ensure the situation is resolved to your satisfaction. Ms. Kellerman, are you there? Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear into the terminal floor. Yes, Mr. Williams. Please work with Captain Rodriguez to immediately accommodate Staff Sergeant Martinez's seating requirements. I don't want to read about this situation in the news tomorrow, if you understand my meaning. The implication was clear. In the age of social media and viral videos, mistreating a veteran could become a public relations disaster within hours. As Hawk ended the call, Sarah touched his arm again. You didn't have to call your boss for me. Actually, Tom Williams isn't my boss, Hawk said with a slight smile. He's the operations manager for the entire Western region. I just happen to know him because I've flown enough emergency medical transports that we've worked together on logistics. Sarah stared at him. You fly medical transports. When needed, organ deliveries, patient transfers, emergency evacuations. Turns out military pilots are pretty good at getting critical missions completed under pressure. There was something in his tone, a depth of purpose, that suggested these weren't just routine assignments for him. Sarah began to understand that Captain Rodriguez's intervention on her behalf wasn't an isolated incident of kindness. This was who he was. Someone who uses position and resources to help others, even when it costs him personally. Why? She asked quietly, stepping slightly away from the crowd, so they could speak more privately. Hawk was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. You asked me earlier why I was doing this. The truth is, 8 months ago, someone I cared about was in a car accident. She was taken to a trauma center 40 minutes away instead of the closer hospital because they had better facilities for her injuries. But the ambulance got stuck in traffic, and those 40 minutes became 2 hours. Sarah's chest tightened as she recognized the pain in his voice. She was a flight attendant, Hawk continued, Isabella Vasquez. She had been volunteering at a children's hospital that night, reading stories to kids who couldn't sleep. She was driving home when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "The thing is, if I had been there, if I had been flying medical transport that night instead of sitting at home watching a game, I could have gotten her to the trauma center in 20 minutes. My helicopter pilot skills, my contacts in emergency services, I had resources that could have saved her life, and I wasn't where I needed to be." Sarah understood now. The desperate need to help her wasn't just about military camaraderie or veteran advocacy. It was about a man trying to fill a void left by the person he couldn't save. "You can't save everyone," she said gently, recognizing the familiar weight of survivor's guilt in his words. "Maybe not, but I can sure as hell try to save the ones I can." Their conversation was interrupted by Patricia's loud throat clearing. "Captain Rodriguez, if I may, I've spoken with our Premier Gold member, and he's agreed to move to a different first-class seat. Staff Sergeant Martinez, we can restore your original seating assignment." Sarah felt a surge of relief, but it was immediately followed by suspicion. "What's the catch?" Patricia's smile was strained but genuine. "No catch. And as a gesture of goodwill for the inconvenience, we're also upgrading your return flight to first class at no additional charge." The crowd of passengers began to murmur approvingly. Several people started slow clapping, which grew into a small round of applause. Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment and pride in equal measure. But as Patricia handed over the new boarding pass, her expression carried a warning meant for Hawk alone. "Captain, while I appreciate your advocacy for our passengers, I hope you understand that this kind of intervention could be viewed as overstepping your role as flight crew. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Caused too much trouble, and there could be consequences for his career." Hawk met her gaze steadily. "Ms. Kellerman, my role is to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone on my aircraft. If that means ensuring a wounded veteran can travel with dignity, then I'm comfortable with wherever that puts me professionally." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced since before the explosion that had changed everything. This man, this stranger who had risked his own position to fight for her, was showing her what it looked like when someone lived by a code that mattered more than personal consequences. As they walked toward the boarding gate together, Sarah realized that Captain Marcus Rodriguez was either the best person she'd met in years, or he was going to break her heart when she discovered that people this good were too rare to last. What she didn't know was that Hawk was thinking the exact same thing about her, and that both of them were about to discover that some connections are forged strong enough to survive whatever trials lay ahead. "Captain Rodriguez," Sarah said as they approached the aircraft, "when we land in San Diego, would you maybe want to get coffee? I'd like to hear more about Isabella, and maybe I could tell you about the people I couldn't save." Hawk stopped walking and looked at her with an expression of surprise and something deeper hope, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "I'd like that very much, Staff Sergeant Martinez." "Sarah, just Sarah. Then call me Marcus. Or Hawk, if you prefer." Neither of them noticed Patricia Kellerman watching from the gate counter, already composing an incident report that would set in motion a chain of events they couldn't possibly anticipate. Some victories they were about to learn come with prices that aren't immediately apparent. But for now, as they boarded Flight 447 together, Sarah Martinez and Marcus Rodriguez were simply two wounded souls who had found something they both thought was lost forever. Proof that there were still people in the world worth fighting for and worth fighting alongside. Flight 447 lifted off from Denver International Airport with the smooth precision that only comes from an experienced pilot at the controls. Sarah Martinez settled into Seat 3A, her damaged leg finally able to stretch out properly for the first time in months. The simple luxury of adequate space felt like a small miracle, but it was nothing compared to the larger miracle of having someone fight for her when she couldn't fight for herself. Through the small first-class cabin, She could see Captain Rodriguez Hawk conducting his routine safety checks with a kind of methodical attention to detail that spoke of military training. Every movement was purposeful, every glance comprehensive. Sarah recognized a hypervigilance that never fully leaves people who've learned to spot danger in the smallest details. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign chimed off, Sarah pulled out her phone to call her mother. She had promised to text when she boarded, but after everything that had happened at the gate, a phone call felt necessary. "Sarah, honey." Patricia Martinez's voice was warm with relief. "How was boarding? Did everything go smoothly?" Sarah looked around the first-class cabin, still somewhat amazed to be there. "Actually, there's a story there. But first, how's Emma? Is she excited about tomorrow?" "She's over the moon. She's been making welcome home signs all week, and she's convinced you're going to love her room decorations. Fair warning, there's a lot of pink involved." Sarah's eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. After 18 months of hospital rooms and rehabilitation centers, the idea of pink decorations and welcome home signs felt surreal. "I can't wait to see them. And I need you to know how grateful I am for taking care of her, for being patient with me, for—" Sarah Elena Martinez, her mother interrupted with the gentle firmness that had guided Sarah through childhood. "You are my daughter, and Emma is my granddaughter. Family takes care of family. Always." The simple statement broke something open in Sarah's chest. For so long, she had felt like a burden on the medical system, on her family, on everyone who had to accommodate her limitations and trauma. But her mother's words carried the unconditional love that she'd forgotten was possible. "I love you, M.O.M. I love you too, Mija. Now, tell me about the story from boarding." Sarah was about to launch into an explanation when she noticed Hawk approaching her row. He moved with the careful balance of someone navigating an aircraft during flight, but there was something in his expression that made her pause. "M.O.M., can I call you back when I land? Something's happening here." "Of course. Safe travels, sweetheart." Sarah ended the call as Hawk stopped beside her seat. Up close, she could see the strain around his eyes, the kind of tension that came from receiving information you wished you could know. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I need to talk with you about something. Do you mind if I sit?" He gestured to the empty seat beside her. "Of course." Sarah felt her heart rate pick up. In her experience, nothing good ever started with, "I need to talk with you about something." Hawk settled into the seat and was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to begin. "I just received a call from my company about the incident at the gate." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Oh, God, are you in trouble because of me? I knew I should have just taken the middle seat." "No," Hawk interrupted firmly. "Sarah, you did nothing wrong. Nothing. What happened at that gate was exactly what should happen when someone tries to treat a veteran like a second-class citizen. Then what's the problem?" Hawk ran a hand through his hair, and Sarah noticed a slight tremor in his fingers. "The problem is that Patricia Kellerman filed an incident report claiming I overstepped my authority as flight crew and created a hostile environment for passengers and staff. That's ridiculous. You were nothing but professional. Professional, maybe, but not exactly subtle." Hawk's smile was rueful. Threatening to delay a flight and calling in regional management tends to ruffle feathers in the corporate world. Sarah felt sick. "What does this mean for you?" "IT means I'm facing a formal review when we land. Could be anything from a reprimand in my file to suspension or termination, depending on how the company wants to handle it." "This is my fault," Sarah whispered. "If I had just accepted—" "Stop." Hawk's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiraling guilt. "Sarah, look at me." She met his eyes, seeing an intensity there that reminded her he'd once been a military commander. What happened today wasn't about airline policies or corporate procedures. It was about basic human decency. And if standing up for that cost me my job, then maybe IT wasn't the right job for me anyway. Sarah stared at him. "You're serious. Dead serious. I've spent 8 months since Isabella's death going through the motions of life that felt increasingly meaningless. Flying rich businessmen to their meetings, navigating corporate politics, pretending that quarterly profit margins matter more than treating people with dignity. He paused, looking out the small aircraft window at the landscape far below. Today was the first time in months that I felt like I was doing something that actually mattered. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. This man, the stranger who had risked everything for her, wasn't just being noble or following some abstract military code. He was a person drowning in grief and purposelessness who had found meaning in defending her dignity. "Hawk," she said softly, "you can't sacrifice your career for someone you just met. That's not fair to yourself, and it's not fair to Isabella's memory." "Isn't IT?" Hawk turned back to her, and Sarah saw something raw and desperate in his expression. Isabella spent her life helping people volunteering at hospitals, working extra shifts to help nervous passengers, sending money to her family in Mexico. She believed that how we treat each other, especially in small moments, defines who we are as human beings. Sarah felt tears building behind her eyes as she began to understand the depth of his loss. "When she died," Hawk continued, "I felt like I had failed the most important test of my life. I wasn't there when she needed me. I couldn't save the person who mattered most. But today, standing up for you, it felt like maybe I could honor her memory by being the person she would have wanted me to be." The aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence, causing both of them to grip their armrests instinctively. But neither broke eye contact. "There's something you need to know," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about why I really needed that first-class seat." Hawk waited, sensing she was about to share something significant. "IT wasn't just about the legroom for my injury," Sarah continued. "I have episodes, panic attacks. They come without warning, and when they hit, I need space. I need to be able to get up and move around without climbing over people. I need to be able to breathe." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "The attack that gave me this Purple Heart, I wasn't the hero everyone thinks I was. I froze for maybe 3 seconds, but in combat, 3 seconds is forever. My unit was depending on me to provide medical support, and I froze because I was terrified." Hawk's expression didn't change, didn't show judgment or disappointment. He simply listened. "7 people died that day," Sarah whispered, "and I survived because I was 3 seconds too late to get to where I was supposed to be. If I hadn't frozen, if I had moved when I was supposed to, I would have been in the blast radius with the rest of my team." The truth hung between them, like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "So you see," Sarah concluded, "I'm not the hero you think I am. I'm just someone who was too scared to do her job when it mattered most, and now I have to live with that for the rest of my life." Hawk was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Sarah, do you know what the survival rate is for combat medics in Afghanistan?" She shook her head. 73%. That means 27% of people who do your job don't come home. And you know why combat medics have a lower survival rate than regular infantry. Sarah met his eyes, sensing where this was going. Because when everyone else is taking cover, medics run toward the wounded. They put themselves in the most dangerous positions to save others. The fact that you experience a moment of human fear doesn't make you a coward, it makes you human. And the fact that you're sitting here, alive and tormented by guilt over something that wasn't your fault, tells me everything I need to know about your character. Have you ever blamed yourself for something that was beyond your control? How do you think Sarah should respond to learning that Hawk might lose his job because of helping her? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes we need to hear from others to understand our own worth. As the aircraft continued its journey toward San Diego, both Sarah Martinez and Marcus Rodriguez sat in profound silence of 2 people who had just revealed the deepest wounds of their souls to each other. Neither knew that this moment of shared vulnerability was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine, or that the connection forming between them was strong enough to survive the storm ahead. What they didn't know was that for the first time in months, neither of them felt completely alone with their pain. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. San Diego International Airport felt like stepping into a different world as Flight 447 touched down under the golden California sun. Sarah Martinez pressed her face to the window, watching familiar palm trees and Spanish-style architecture slide past as they taxied to the gate. Home. After 18 months of sterile hospital rooms and rehabilitation centers, the word felt foreign on her tongue. But the moment of peace shattered when she saw the crowd waiting at Gate B12. Through the aircraft window, Sarah counted at least 6 people in corporate suits, 2 airport security officers, and what looked like a local news crew with cameras and microphones. Her stomach clenched with a familiar anxiety that had plagued her since the blast of fear of being the center of unwanted attention. "Hawk," she whispered, touching his arm as he prepared to leave the cockpit. "There are reporters out there." Marcus looked out the window, and his expression darkened. Damn. Someone leaked the story. Is that bad? In the current climate? A story about an airline mistreating a veteran while a pilot risks his career to defend her. Hawk's laugh was bitter. It's either going to make me a hero or end my career permanently. There's rarely any middle ground with these things. As passengers began deplaning, Sarah noticed several of them glancing between her and the waiting crowd, clearly putting together the pieces. The businessman who had pushed past her at the gate in Denver was now looking at her with something like shame. The young mother with the crying baby gave her a respectful nod. When Sarah and Hawk finally exited the jetway together, the scene erupted into controlled chaos. Camera flashes popped, reporters shouted questions, and corporate executives converged with the precision of a military operation. Captain Rodriguez. Captain Rodriguez. A blonde reporter thrust a microphone toward Hawk. "Is it true you threatened to delay a commercial flight to defend a veteran passenger?" Staff Sergeant Martinez. Another reporter targeted Sarah. "How does it feel to know a pilot risked his job to stand up for your rights?" Sarah felt her breathing become shallow, the familiar precursor to a full panic attack. The crowd, the noise, the cameras. IT was too much, too overwhelming. She began backing away, but there was nowhere to go. That's when the corporate executives moved in. "Captain Rodriguez," said a stern-faced man in an expensive suit. "I'm Regional Director James Mitchell. I need you to come with me immediately for your disciplinary review. And you must be Staff Sergeant Martinez," added a woman with a clipboard and a fake smile. "I'm Corporate Communications Director Lisa Chun. We'd love to get your side of the story for our internal investigation." The implication was clear. They were being separated, isolated, and probably manipulated into giving conflicting accounts that would protect the airline's interests. "I'm not going anywhere without Sarah," Hawk said firmly, stepping closer to her. "Captain," Mitchell's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "this is not a negotiation. Your employment status is currently under review, and any further insubordination will only make matters worse. Ms. Martinez's situation is a separate matter that will be handled through different channels." Sarah could see Hawk's jaw clench, the same expression she'd seen when he faced down Patricia Kellerman at the gate. But this time, the stakes were higher, and the opponents were more powerful. "It's okay," Sarah said quietly, though her voice shook. "Hawk, go handle your review. I can manage this." But even as she said the words, Sarah wasn't sure she believed them. The crowd of reporters and executives felt like enemy territory, and she was already struggling to keep her breathing under control. Hawk looked at her with an expression of anguish. "I promised I wouldn't leave you to fight alone." "You kept that promise," Sarah replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. "At the gate in Denver, when I needed help, you were there. Now you need to take care of yourself." The separation felt like tearing apart something that had just begun to heal. As Mitchell led Hawk away toward a conference room, Sarah found herself surrounded by corporate representatives and reporters, all talking at once, all wanting pieces of her story. But the worst was yet to come. Staff Sergeant Martinez, Lisa Chin said with practiced sympathy, "I want you to know that United Airlines deeply regrets any misunderstanding about your seating assignment. We've prepared a generous settlement offer to resolve this matter quickly and quietly." Sarah blinked. "Settlement offer?" $50,000, plus lifetime premier status, plus a formal apology from our CEO. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that this was a simple booking error that was resolved professionally by our staff. The offer hung in the air like a trap disguised as generosity. Sarah understood immediately what they were really asking. Take the money and help them destroy Hawk's career by denying he was necessary to resolve the situation. And Captain Rodriguez? Sarah asked carefully. Lisa's smile became strained. Captain Rodriguez's employment situation is a separate matter. Our investigation has revealed a pattern of aggressive behavior and insubordination that predates today's incident. His contract will likely be terminated regardless of your decision. The lie hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had seen Hawk's personnel file when he made his phone call to Regional Operations Tom Williams, had spoken about him with obvious respect and appreciation. There was no pattern of aggressive behavior. This was retaliation, pure and simple. You're lying, Sarah said flatly. I understand you're upset, Lisa continued smoothly, but you have to think practically. Captain Rodriguez is a grown man who made his own choices. He knew the potential consequences of his actions. You, on the other hand, are a disabled veteran who deserves compensation for the distress you've experienced. The words disabled veteran were delivered with the kind of false compassion that made Sarah's skin crawl. She was being patronized, manipulated, and asked to betray someone who had shown her more dignity in one afternoon than most people had in 18 months. Meanwhile, 20 yards away in a sterile conference room, Hawk was facing his own impossible situation. Captain Rodriguez, Regional Director Mitchell was saying, "Let me be clear about your position. The incident in Denver has attracted unwanted media attention and created liability concerns for the company. We have passenger complaints about your aggressive behavior, staff reports of you creating a hostile work environment, and now video footage of you publicly challenging company policies." Hawk's hands were steady on the table, but inside, he felt like he was drowning. Those are serious accusations. I'd like to see the evidence supporting them. Mitchell slid a folder across the table. 3 passenger complaints filed in the last 6 months. 2 staff reports of unprofessional behavior. And now this incident, which has already been picked up by social media and local news. As Hawk opened the folder, his heart sank. The complaints were real, but they were taken completely out of context. A passenger upset about a medical emergency landing. A flight attendant who felt undermined when Hawk overruled her decision to deny a service animal accommodation. A gate agent who complained when Hawk insisted on personally checking weather conditions that she considered acceptable. Every incident involved Hawk prioritizing passenger safety and dignity over convenience or policy. But presented without context, they painted a picture of an insubordinate employee who consistently challenged authority. Here's what's going to happen, Mitchell continued. You're going to resign, effective immediately. We'll provide a neutral reference for future employment, and in exchange, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement about today's events. And if I refuse, then you'll be terminated for cause, which means no severance pay, no benefits continuation, and no positive references. Plus, we'll pursue legal action for the financial damages caused by your disruption of normal operations. Hawk stared at the resignation letter that had already been prepared for his signature. His entire career, his purpose since leaving the military, his means of supporting himself, all of it balanced on the edge of a pen. But worse than professional consequences was the knowledge that Sarah was somewhere in the same building, probably facing her own impossible choices. The connection they had formed, the healing they had both begun to experience, the possibility of something meaningful growing between them, all of it was being systematically destroyed by corporate damage control. Back in the main terminal, Sarah was reaching her breaking point. I need to think about this, she told Lisa Chun, backing away from the crowd of executives and reporters. Of course, Lisa replied smoothly. But I should mention that this offer expires in 24 hours. After that, we'll be forced to pursue other remedies to protect our company's reputation. The threat was barely veiled. Take the money and help destroy Hawk, or face a prolonged legal battle against corporate lawyers while dealing with ongoing PTSD and recovery. Sarah found herself in a bathroom stall, hyperventilating and shaking as the walls of the small space seemed to close in around her. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and called the one person who had always been her anchor. "MOM," she whispered when Patricia answered. "Sarah, How was the flight? Are you at the airport? MOM, I need help. Something's happening, and I don't know what to do. As Sarah tried to explain the situation through tears and panic, she realized that for the first time since the explosion in Afghanistan, she wasn't just fighting for her own survival. She was fighting for someone else. Someone who had shown her that there were still people in the world worth fighting for. But the forces arrayed against them seemed insurmountable, and the cost of resistance might be more than either of them could afford to pay. In separate rooms of the same airport, two wounded souls who had found healing in each other's courage were being systematically broken apart by a system that valued corporate image over human decency. The darkest hour had arrived, and neither Sarah nor Hawk could see any light on the horizon. Patricia Martinez had been waiting in the San Diego airport pickup area for 20 minutes when her phone rang with her daughter's panicked voice. As a retired high school principal and the mother of a combat veteran, Patricia had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when someone was trying to intimidate her family. Mija slowed down. She said firmly, pulling into a parking space, "Tell me exactly what these people are asking you to do." Through Sarah's broken explanation, Patricia began to understand the scope of what was happening. Her daughter, her brave, honorable daughter, who had served 3 tours and earned a Purple Heart, was being manipulated by corporate executives who saw her as nothing more than a liability to be managed. Sarah Elena Martinez, Patricia said with a voice that had commanded respect from thousands of students over 30 years, "Listen to me very carefully. You are not signing anything. You are not talking to any more reporters, and you are certainly not betraying someone who stood up for you. But MOM, they're saying Hawk will lose his job either way, and I could really use the money." "The money doesn't matter," Patricia interrupted. "What matters is that you look at yourself in the mirror tomorrow morning and know that you acted with honor. Everything else we figure out together." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a straightening of her spine that came from remembering who she was before the blast, before the guilt, before the long months of feeling broken and worthless. "What should I do?" "You should go find this Captain Rodriguez and make sure he knows he's not fighting alone," Patricia said. "Because from what you've told me, he sounds like exactly the kind of man who would benefit from having a combat medic watching his 6. 20 yards away, in the conference room where his career was being dismantled, Hawk stared at the resignation letter, while Regional Director Mitchell tapped his expensive pen impatiently. "Captain, I need a decision. Sign the letter, or we move forward with termination proceedings." Hawk picked up the pen, and for a moment, Mitchell's face showed satisfaction. But instead of signing, Hawk set the pen down and looked directly into Mitchell's eyes. "You know what? I think I'd like to review these passenger complaints more carefully, especially the timestamps and the context surrounding each incident." Mitchell's expression hardened. "Captain, I don't think you understand your position." "Oh, I understand it perfectly," Hawk said, standing up. "You're hoping I'll panic and sign away my rights without examining the evidence against me. But here's the thing about military training: it teaches you to stay calm under pressure and never accept intelligence reports at face value." Hawk opened the folder again and began reading the complaints with the methodical attention of someone trained to spot inconsistencies in mission briefings. The first complaint was from a businessman upset about an emergency landing in Phoenix due to a passenger's heart attack. But the timestamp showed it was filed 3 days after a local news story praised United Airlines for the life-saving diversion, clearly a retaliatory complaint from someone angry about missing his connection. The second complaint came from a first-class passenger who accused Hawk of aggressive behavior for insisting that a service dog be allowed to remain with its veteran owner despite the passenger's allergies. The complaint was filed the same day a disability rights organization publicly thanked United for accommodating disabled passengers. The third complaint was the most telling. IT was filed by Jennifer, the gate agent from Denver, just 2 hours after the day's incident. The timestamp proved it was created after the media attention began, not before. "These aren't legitimate complaints," Hawk said quietly. "They're damage control. You fabricated a paper trail to justify firing me for doing the right thing." Mitchell's confident expression cracked slightly. "That's a serious accusation, Captain." "Yes, IT is. And unlike your so-called evidence, I can prove mine." Hawk pulled out his phone and opened his voice recording app. I've been recording this entire conversation, which means I have documentation of your attempt to coerce me into resigning under false pretenses. The color drained from Mitchell's face. Recording without consent is illegal in California. Actually, California is a two-party consent state for private conversations. Hawk replied with a slight smile. But this isn't a private conversation. It's an employment disciplinary proceeding, which means different rules apply. Plus, there's a security camera in this conference room, recording everything anyway. Mitchell glanced up at the small camera mounted in the corner, clearly having forgotten about his presence. Here's what's going to happen, Hawk continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had once commanded elite military units. I'm going to walk out of this room and find Staff Sergeant Martinez. Then we're going to have a conversation with those reporters outside, and I'm going to tell them exactly what kind of pressure United Airlines puts on employees who stand up for veterans. You signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of your employment, which becomes void if the company engages in illegal retaliation, Hawk finished. And attempting to coerce an employee into resigning through fabricated complaints definitely qualifies as illegal retaliation. As Hawk moved toward the door, Mitchell played his final card. Captain, think about what you're doing. You will never work for another major airline. We have industry connections, and word travels fast. You're destroying your entire career for someone you met 6 hours ago. Hawk paused at the door and turned back. Mr. Mitchell, 6 hours ago I met someone who reminded me what it feels like to do something that actually matters. If standing up for her cost me a career that was slowly killing my soul anyway, then maybe that's not such a bad trade. Meanwhile, Sarah had emerged from the bathroom stall with a new sense of purpose. Her mother's words had awakened something that had been dormant since the explosion in the part of her that had run toward wounded soldiers under enemy fire, the part that had chosen to become a medic because helping others gave her life meaning. She found Lisa Chin still holding court with the reporters, spinning a narrative about United Airlines' commitment to veteran affairs and their generous settlement offer. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the corporate double-talk. Lisa turned with a patronizing smile. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, have you had a chance to consider our offer?" "I have," Sarah replied, stepping closer to the cameras and microphones. "And I'd like to make a statement." The reporters immediately focused on Sarah, sensing a more authentic story than the corporate spin they'd been receiving. "My name is Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic with the 101st Airborne Division. Today, United Airlines bumped me from a first-class seat that I needed for medical reasons related to my combat injuries. When I tried to explain my situation, I was dismissed and humiliated by gate staff who treated me like I was trying to scam the system." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word, the authority of someone accustomed to giving medical briefings under pressure. But then Captain Marcus Rodriguez, a Navy SEAL veteran and United pilot, stepped in. He didn't know me anything, but he recognized that what was happening was wrong. He put his own career on the line to ensure that a wounded veteran was treated with basic dignity. Lisa Chen's smile became increasingly strained as Sarah continued. "A few minutes ago, United Airlines offered me $50,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and help them destroy Captain Rodriguez's career. They want me to say this was all a simple booking error that their staff handled professionally." The camera zoomed in on Sarah's face as she delivered her verdict. "I'm here to tell you that's a lie. United Airlines is trying to cover up the fact that their corporate culture treats veterans as problems to be managed rather than heroes to be honored. And they're willing to destroy a good man's career to protect their image." As Sarah spoke, she noticed a familiar figure emerging from the conference area Hawk, walking toward the crowd with the confident bearing of someone who had just made the most important decision of his life. Their eyes met across the terminal, and in that moment, both of them understood that they had chosen to fight together rather than surrender separately. The turning point had arrived, and for the first time since landing in San Diego, both Sarah Martinez and Marcus Rodriguez felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. The final confrontation was about to begin. The San Diego airport terminal had never seen anything quite like the impromptu press conference that erupted when Sarah Martinez and Marcus Rodriguez found themselves standing together, facing down the corporate machine that had tried to separate them. As Sarah finished her statement to reporters, Hawk stepped up beside her with the recording device still running on his phone. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Two military veterans, standing shoulder to shoulder, refusing to be intimidated by forces that value profit over principle. Captain Rodriguez. The blonde reporter thrust her microphone toward him. What's your response to United's claims that you have a pattern of aggressive behavior? Hawk's smile was calm, confident the expression of someone who had just gained the tactical advantage. I'm glad you asked, because I have something that might interest you. He held up his phone, the recording app clearly visible. This is a 47-minute recording of my disciplinary meeting with Regional Director James Mitchell. In it, you'll hear him attempt to coerce me into signing a resignation letter based on fabricated complaints that were created after the day's incident specifically to justify my termination. The crowd of reporters surged forward, cameras focusing on a device that contained evidence of corporate retaliation. Furthermore, Hawk continued, I can prove through timestamps and cross-references that every complaint in my personnel file was filed in retaliation for incidents where I prioritized passengers' safety and dignity over corporate convenience. Lisa Chin stepped forward, her corporate composure cracking. Captain Rodriguez, you're making very serious accusations without any proof. A new voice cut through the tension like a blade. Time stopped. The room went silent, because the person who just spoke, they could end this entire story with what they knew. One revelation. One truth. Everything changes. What happens next? Part 2 is coming. Hit that subscribe button now.